Does Elizabeth Holmes have to pay back the $144 million? Yes, $144 million that the jury found that she defrauded from investors. Does she have to pay that back? Will she pay it back is a whole nother story. Can she pay it back is a whole nother story. So, hi there, I'm Michele Hagan. I'm a legal analyst and a former prosecutor. You might recognize me. I provided a lot of legal analysis for the Elizabeth Holmes case. And I'm going to give you a preview of what the potential, we call it restitution. That's what it's called when you pay back the victim for loss. In this case, it's $144 million. It's 3 investors that she defrauded this money from. They invested in her company, her blood testing technology, based on her representations that the technology worked. The results were accurate, fast, reliable, cheap, accurate. Turns out, a jury in San Jose Federal District Court convicted Elizabeth Holmes of 4 counts of fraud. 1 relating to conspiring with her co-defendant, alleged co-conspirator, Sunny Balwani, of defrauding investors, and 3 counts of fraud against 3 investors. And we're going to talk about who those investors are. We're going to look at how much money they lost, and we're also going to look at some questions. And, because you know me, I like to look at the law, we're going to look at the federal guidelines to see what they say about what rights do the victims have. Do they have a say in what kind of sentence Elizabeth Holmes gets? Let's talk about that. So please do like, subscribe, and share, and do leave a comment, because that's why I created this channel, so I can provide my legal analysis directly to you, and then I can find out what you think. What's your analysis of this situation? Is she going to have to pay restitution? Can she pay it? Will she pay it? All right, so let's get into it. So, first things first. Does Elizabeth Holmes have to pay restitution? Well, here it is. This is the federal sentencing guidelines. It says, in the case of an identifiable victim, we have 3. We know who they are, and I'll tell you about them. The court shall, it's not may, it's shall, enter a restitution order for the full amount of the victim's loss. The full amount, not just half the amount, not just 10% of the amount. But here's the catch. I'm sure she will be entitled to what we call a victim restitution hearing, in which her attorneys can contest the amount of loss for each one of these investors. Possibly the probation department will put it in the pre-sentence report after the probation department reaches out to these 3 investors to find out what is their actual loss. So let's just go with $144 million for purposes of this video. And again, this is just my opinion, and I'm curious to see what your opinion is. All right, so let's look at who these investors are. So here's a copy of the indictment. This is filed with the court. This is the indictment, and you will see counts 3 through 8 relate to the investors. Okay, and just to give you some background, there were 6 investors. The jury came back and convicted her on 3, and the other 3 they could not reach a decision on. And they also didn't find her guilty of the 3 patient-related counts. So we're just talking about, for purposes of this video, of the 3, well actually it's 4 investor counts. 1 is the conspiracy, and the other 3 relate to the individual investors. Okay, so if you notice here it says Elizabeth Holmes and Sunny Balwani. So they're co-defendants. He's also charged with the exact same 11 counts, same prosecutors, same judge, probably mostly the same evidence too. But we'll see what his defense is. His trial starts in a couple weeks. All right, so who are these investors? Who lost money? Who was defrauded out of their money? All right, here we go. So the jury came back on the counts 6, 7, and 8. Those are the 3 counts relating to fraud of the investors. The conspiracy relates to just defrauding investors. But these 3, so count 6, $38 million. If you notice, look, this is a period of how many months? 10 months, where Theranos took in approximately, $154 million in 10 months? That's pretty good. That's a pretty good showing. That's a productive day at work. All right, so let's look at count 6. Who transferred money from their bank account from Citibank to Theranos' bank? That's why it's called wire fraud, because it goes across the wire. The money is transferred. It's a wire transaction that goes across state lines into another bank or between banks. That's why it's called wire fraud. Okay? So on February 6th, somebody sent Theranos $38 million. Well, who is this? This relates to the testimony of Brian Grossman. He's the representative for the I think it's the PFM Fund, the Health Sciences Fund in San Francisco, where Brian Grossman actually went to the Theranos lab, checked it out, brought one of his experts with him to check out the technology, went through all the information that Elizabeth Holmes provided him, which included, by the way, misappropriating those 3 logos, right? You remember from the pharmaceutical companies? From GSK, who was it? I think it was Pfizer, and the third one I can't remember. But anyway, she admitted to doing that on the stand. So anyway, the $38 million, that money is considered a loss to the victims from the fraud. So that would be restitution. So that $38 million, that Health Sciences Fund and Brian Grossman can request that money to be repaid back. Okay, count 7. Who's count 7? Who on October 31st in 2014 transferred $99 million, almost $100 million. It came from a northern Chicago bank. This person is referred to as investor 4. Brian Grossman was investor 3. Anyway, the money went from the northern Chicago bank to the Theranos bank. Approximately $100 million. Who was that? Who's investor 4? Well, that relates to the testimony from Lisa Peterson as a representative from the DeVoss family, as in Betsy DeVoss, as in her relatives. I think it was her brother and her sister, if I'm correct about this. Anyway, those family members, those DeVoss family members, went to the Theranos lab to check it out. They met with Elizabeth. They talked to Elizabeth. I'm not sure Sunny was there. But anyway, Lisa Peterson testified she reviewed the binder that Elizabeth had sent her. And that also included those misappropriated logos, right? From the pharmaceutical companies, representing that Theranos was working with the pharmaceutical companies at that time, which wasn't true. So the jury convicted her of count 7 for the $100 million for the misrepresentations that were made regarding fast, accurate, reliable technology. Having contracts with the military, turns out wasn't true. Contracts with the pharmaceutical companies at that time wasn't true. So those were that was the evidence of the fraud. Now, the DeVoss family is also entitled to get the approximately $100 million back from Ms. Holmes. Now let's look at the third count. The third investor number 5. Whoever investor number 5 was on October 31st, isn't that Halloween? 2014. They transferred approximately $6 million from their Morgan Chase account to Theranos' bank account. Who's investor 5? Well, that's David Mosley. David Mosley is a lawyer. He's also, I think, good buddies with, or his client is Henry Kissinger. And Henry Kissinger is the one that asked David Mosley to check out Theranos. And David Mosley invested $6 million approximately of his own money. And that money was also, the jury found, to be defrauded from him as well. So he's also entitled to get the $6 million back. So if you add those numbers up from investor 3, which is the Health Sciences Fund, investor 4, the DeVoss family, investor 5, which is David Mosley, that's approximately $144 million that Elizabeth Holmes could be required to pay back if the court orders restitution. The court will order restitution. Okay? So let's also look at what, do these victims have a say? These investors. And there's what's called the Crime Rights Act. That means if you are a victim of a crime in the federal court system, this is what applies to you. These are the rights that you have. These are the rights that every investor has. The DeVoss family, Brian Grossman with the Health Sciences Fund, as well as David Mosley. And I'll go through these with you. And by the way, if you ever, gosh forbid, have to deal with being a victim of a crime in a federal case, these rights apply to you, and these are the rights that you have. So it says a crime victim has the following rights. The right to be reasonably protected from the accused. Protected from the accused. I don't think there's any evidence of any violence or any threats to the investors. I don't think that really applies. But we'll see what the pre-sentence report says, because we know what Elizabeth Holmes and Sunny Balwani, what kind of actions they took towards the whistleblowers, Erica Chung and Tyler Schultz. But I'm not aware of any evidence relating to these investors. So let's move on. Number 2, the right to a reasonable and accurate and timely notice of any public court proceeding. That means all of these investors are allowed to be given notice, to be appraised of what's going on in this case, and to be told about the sentencing hearing coming up in September. And they're also, I'm sure, involved in, if not testifying in Balwani's case. Remember, because it's the same charges. So, and if you think about this, I think it was the Epstein case, right? The Jeffrey Epstein case where the victims sued because they were not given notice. Do you remember that? They weren't given notice of the sentencing deal between Epstein and the prosecutors. So they filed I think they filed a lawsuit or a motion to get the conviction overturned because they weren't given proper notice. So anyway, that's a scenario. That's an example of this where these investors will be given notice of when the sentencing is. All right, number 3, the right not to be excluded from any such public court proceedings. So they have a right to be there. Number 4, the right to be reasonably heard. That means they can stand up and give, what we call a victim impact statement. They can get up and give a statement to the court and say, this is how much money we lost. This is how it's impacted us. These are the representations that Elizabeth Holmes made to us. They can say, they have the right to say whatever, right? They have a right to be reasonably heard at any release, involving any release. If for some reason she gets released out of prison. Now, again, this is assuming that she doesn't win an appeal, right? So they have a right to be, investors have a right to be to the sentencing. They also have a reasonable right to confer with the attorney for the government. That means they have the right to talk to the prosecutors on this case and talk about how this has impacted them, the amount of loss. So in other words, they have a say in the sentencing of Elizabeth Holmes. Each one of these investors has a say in the sentencing of Elizabeth Holmes. So you might ask me, well, what about all those other counts where the jury didn't reach a verdict? Do they have a right to say anything? Well, she was convicted of those 3 investors. So it's going to be really focused on those investors' loss, all right? So, number 6, the right to full and timely restitution. Here it is. It says it again, the right to full restitution and timely restitution. So Elizabeth Holmes is going to be required to pay back the $144 million to these investors. Now, number 7, the right to proceedings being free from unreasonable delay. In other words, this case can't get kicked down the road, right? Yes, there will be an appeal, and yes, I assume there will be an appeal. And so, at some point, the judge is going to have to sentence Elizabeth Holmes. Now, the terms of the sentence might be stayed during the time of the appeal. But if she gets a lot of time, it's more than likely she will be in prison pending appeal while the appeal's going on. And number 8, the right to be treated with fairness and respect for the victim's dignity and privacy. So that would apply to each one of these victims as well, each one of these investors. Okay, so I wanted to read you this. The court shall ensure that the crime victim is afforded the rights. So it's not discretionary. Each one of these investors, as a victim of Elizabeth Holmes's fraud, as the jury convicted her, each one of them has all of the above rights that I just talked to you about. The rest of this you can read. It's pretty much repeating what I just said. So let's see. Is there anything else here? I think. Here is crime victim means the person against whom the state offense is committed. So that's what would mean that the other investors, the 3 other investors that the jury hung on, was not able to come back with a decision on, they're not going to be a part of this restitution, right? Because the jury didn't find an offense was committed against them. They were undecided. So the crime victims also can seek the advice of an attorney as well regarding their rights. So the big question is, how much restitution do you think she will be required to pay? And you tell me, do you think Elizabeth Holmes is going to be paying back this restitution? Do you think she's going to have the ability to pay the restitution? Her attorneys in the trial said that she didn't gain anything. She didn't take a dime. She didn't sell any stock. Well, I guess if you want to overlook the fact that she was taking over $400,000 a year in income, and who knows what else. But relating to this specific case, these investors are entitled to restitution. They're entitled to get their $99 million back, their $38 million back, and their $6 million back. She's going to have to disclose her financials. The court's going to want to know what's your ability to pay this restitution. And it's up to the judge. The judge will determine what the appropriate amount of restitution is, whether she's going to pay it in a lump sum or she's going to pay it over time. We will see. And, the pre-sentence report that the probation department is going to put together for the September hearing will give us an idea of her ability to pay restitution. So we'll find that out. But she's not going to be skating on this. So in other words, I'm sure she's probably, putting together her next empire that she's going to be building. So, if she takes in money while she's in prison, that money, if the judge awards this restitution, will go straight to these victims, to these investors. So I hope this has been helpful to you. I'm curious to see what you think, whether or not she's going to pay back restitution, whether she should pay restitution. So please do leave a comment. Thank you very much for subscribing. Thank you for sharing this video. Thank you for liking the video. Thank you for watching. Please do leave a comment and please do subscribe. Thank you very much.